Please rise for the jury. Thank you. Please be seated. They call you as witness.
Your Honor, actually, the parties are going to stipulate for the admittance of a 911 call.
Yes. What is the mark on this?
It's been marked as State's Exhibit 9, but it's a stipulated exhibit.
Okay. It's stipulated. And what is it?
It's the 911 call by Omaree Varela Casaus.
Any objection to, obviously, to his evidence?
No, Your Honor.
Is it your intent to publish it at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. It's just under 2 minutes, I believe.
Let me see if we can get it in the device if you could. Let's see if we can. I think it's actually in the your computer that's up there.
Yes.
You might want to give me a second to get it on the screen.
Sure.
Yeah, I just called my son's pediatrician. My son was playing on a metal horse, like a rocking horse. I had just given him his medication. He's on new medication. I'm disabled. He was playing with my 2-year-old. My 2-year-old pushed him off the horse. And it looked kind of like he was having a seizure or something, so I was trying to do CPR and push on his chest and try to get him thinking. What address are you at? He's really out of it. It's 4909 Comanche Road Northeast, and the pediatrician said, a house. The pediatrician said to call you guys and to give you guys the medication that I gave to him and to, hold on. How old is your son? He's 9. And he was pushed off the metal horse? Yeah, well, he was playing on it, and my little boy gets real aggressive and doesn't like to share him, so I thought Omaree's leg had got stuck and he would have had enough time to catch himself, but he didn't catch himself, and I heard him hit his head. So I was trying to pushing on his stomach, trying to get him, and my little boy was getting really excited and saying, Omaree, play, and I tried to put cold water on him. He's okay, he's going to be okay, just fell off, baby. Did he stop breathing? No, he hasn't stopped breathing, but he didn't. I tried to put cold water on him. He has ADHD and behavior problems. Is he responding? No, he's not responding. Okay, let's get paramedics on the line 1 second.
Call you next week.
And Your Honor, the State's going to call Toby Baca as our next witness.
So Jensen, would you go get him? So would you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide in this court here this afternoon will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and the guilty of perjury?
Yes, sir, I do.
Just have a seat there. And state your full name for the record. Scoot up to that microphone if you would, Mr. Baca, and state your full name for our record.
Toby Baca Jr.
Just a moment.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
And how are you employed?
I work for the city of Albuquerque as a firefighter with the Albuquerque Fire Department.
And how long have you worked as a firefighter?
17 years.
And what's your rank?
I'm a captain.
And what are the duties for a captain with the Albuquerque Fire Department?
It's a testable position. You have to go through the rank structure of firefighter second class, then firefighter first class, then you can promote to driver, lieutenant, and then you can take a captain's test after that many years. It's usually 2-year increments.
All right. So does that make you a supervisor?
Yes, sir.
All right. And how long have you been a captain?
I've been a captain for just a little over a year.
All right. And so back in December of 2013, what was your rank?
I was a paramedic lieutenant on Rescue 19 at that day.
Okay. And what kind of specialized training do you have as a firefighter? You mentioned you were a paramedic, but so what kind of training goes into that?
You have to go through a paramedic class, which is approximately a year long. You have to test at a national certification and just do yearly training to make sure that you're up on your skills.
And is there a difference between like an EMT versus a paramedic?
There's 3 different levels. There's EMT basic, there's EMT intermediate, and then the highest level being EMT paramedic.
All right. And is that what you are?
Yes, sir.
And how long have you been an EMT paramedic?
9 years.
All right. And what's, I mean, you said there's some difference in training, but are there certain things that a paramedic can do that an EMT cannot do?
EMT basic?
Yes.
Yes. Start IVs, intubate patients, and administer medications. Also manually defibrillate patients if needed for cardiac arrest.
They cannot do this, I'm sorry?
They can do it?
They can do it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
A
So
paramedic can do it.
a paramedic can do it, but an EMT basic cannot?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as a paramedic, what kind of calls did you respond to?
What type of calls do I respond to? I
Yes, sir.
respond to everything from sick calls to chest pain calls, cardiac calls, traumatic calls, pulseless and apneic calls, motor vehicle accidents, just any type of EMS call.
So anytime someone needed some sort of emergency medical, you guys would respond?
Correct.
And are there times where the Albuquerque Fire Department and Albuquerque Ambulance would respond?
Generally, they respond to all calls, all EMS calls. It's a tiered system, so we'll be the first responders, and Albuquerque Ambulance will be the transporting unit. On certain calls where we need more than 1 medic on scene, we have 2 medics on our rescues at this point, but certain calls like code blues, such as a person found pulseless and apneic, we'll work together with Albuquerque Ambulance throughout that code call.
And what does apneic mean?
Not breathing.
And were you working on December 27th, 2013?
Yes.
And did you respond to a call regarding Omaree Varela?
Yes.
How did that call come into you?
I believe it came in as an unknown situation regarding a 9-year-old little boy.
And where was the call to?
I'm sorry?
Where did you go? Where was
The
the
exact
call?
address?
Yeah,
I don't
yes.
recall the exact address.
Would as part of your role, did you write a report?
Yes, sir.
Care for the patient. Would looking at that report help refresh your memory?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, approach on
Yes.
4909 Comanche Road Northeast.
All right. Thank you, sir. Do you recall the age of the patient you're responding to?
Yes.
How old was he?
I believe 9 years old, but somewhere in our dispatch, I believe it stated that he was 10 years old.
Okay. But it's your understanding that he was 9 years old?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall how much he weighed?
I believe it was 27 to 29 kilograms.
Okay. Would looking at your report, would that help
Yes, sir.
give you the exact amount?
$26.
And you said that's in kilograms?
Yes, sir.
Do you know like the rough conversion from kilograms to pounds for people that aren't as familiar with the
Roughly,
metric?
it's half of the pounds.
Okay, so you think it would be
56 to 60 pounds.
okay. What time did the call come in?
I don't know the exact time. It was between 5 and 6 p.m.
Would for the exact time, would looking at your report help refresh your memory?
Yes, sir. Dispatch was at 16:30, 400 hours.
And so is that 4:34 p.m.?
Yes, sir.
How long did it take you to arrive on scene?
Your Honor, maybe approach.
How long did it take you after you received the call to arrive on scene?
We were on scene at 16:36.
All right. And as the lieutenant paramedic on scene, what's your role when you get there?
My role is to assess the patient's condition and determine the appropriate care.
And when there are multiple paramedics on scene, how do you decide who does what?
It's generally directed by the senior officer on the Albuquerque Fire Department.
Okay, so in this case, was that you?
Correct.
All right. And so if you could, what happened when you arrived? When you arrived at the scene, what did you do?
We entered the residence. The patient's mother was talking with the police department, and I overheard her saying something about he was complaining of stomach pain the night before, and she gave him some medicine, and I don't know if that's what it was. We walked past them, saw Albuquerque ambulance taking the patient off the bed and turning and looking at me and telling me that the patient was pulseless and apneic. We laid him on the floor, checked again for vital signs, which we had no respirations and no pulse, and initiated CPR.
All right. And so just so we're clear, who was on scene when you were, who was in that room when with Omaree at that time when you arrived?
Albuquerque ambulance.
All right. And Based on the initial call, is that what you were expecting to find when you walked into that room?
No.
What were you expecting?
Unknown situations, you don't really know what you're going to find. You might find someone unconscious. You might find someone that's pulseless and apneic. You can have a totally different situation where a patient is sitting down talking to you and someone called because they just felt that that person wasn't acting normally, so wasn't really sure what we were going to find.
Okay. Did you feel his skin, Omaree's skin?
Yes, I did.
And how did it feel?
No, his core was still warm. His hands were a little cold.
All right. Is there a reason why, like, the hands may be cold, but the core may be warmer?
Objection, speculation.
If he knows.
I'm sorry?
If he knows.
So if you know the answer to the question, you can.
Yes, it's circulation. When your heart's pumping, it builds up your blood pressure, forces the blood to the furthest extremities, being your hands. When there's a loss of circulation, the temperature of the body will start to cool based on the distance. So your extremities will cool first, then your arms, and then your core being last.
Okay. And in response to this condition, what did you do?
We initiated CPR and started getting the patient on the monitor to see what type of heart activity we may have had. We started assisting respirations with the back valve mask, and we pulled out a Broslo tape, which is a measurement for children, to determine the dosage of medications for that size of child.
How does the Broslo tape work?
It's a color-coded system. You place one end of it at the head of the patient, the other end of it ends up at the feet, gives you another color code, and everything within that color code will be the doses of medications for that particular child.
All right. And so did you administer any drugs?
Yes, we did.
What type of drugs did you administer?
Epinephrine.
And what does epinephrine do? Why do you administer epinephrine?
That's basically adrenaline type drug to help start the heart.
All right. All right. And I'm going to jump back just a little bit, and then we're going to come back to the epinephrine. When you were taking his vital signs, did you notice any sort of reaction with his pupils?
I didn't. One of the other medics on scene did.
And what was noted as part of your resuscitative efforts?
That his pupils were equal and reacted.
And what does that mean?
That his pupils were the same size and they reacted to light by constricting a little.
Is that indicative of anything?
That there's still some brain activity going on. That's why there was that response.
Okay. Going back to the epinephrine, is there a protocol you use when using epinephrine?
Yeah, it's the Bernalillo County protocols.
And what are they? Like how do they determine when you can administer epinephrine?
Depending on the heart rhythm that you find.
And in this case, were you said you did administer epinephrine. How many doses?
I don't recall exactly how many doses we administered.
Was it more than one?
Yes.
How often can you administer a dose?
Every 3 to 5 minutes.
All right. And who keeps track of that time?
The officer in charge, which would be me.
So you would have been keeping track of the time for the amount of doses and how often?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You also noted that you were using a bag valve mask.
Yes, sir.
What is that?
It's a bag that has a mask goes around the patient's face. It has a bag that fills with air, and it helps with respirations of a patient who's not breathing.
And are there any other kind of tools that are used with the bag valve mask that help determine whether or not there's any signs of life on a patient?
No.
What is capnography?
Capnography just determines the level of CO2 inside the body. ventilating a patient, the exhalation will have CO2 in it, and that's what capnography does, is it measures that CO2.
And is that, how do you measure that? Or what device measures that?
We have a device called a LifePak 15.
And is that on the bag valve mask, or is that a separate device?
It's a separate device.
How do you use then the device? And what was the name of it again? I'm sorry, sir.
LifePak 15.
The LifePak 15?
Mm-hmm.
How is that used?
It's battery operated. We put connect the tubing to the device, and then we put the tubing inside the patient's nose, sort of like another device for administering oxygen called a nasal cannula. And based off the air that's coming out of the patient's lungs, it does its own measuring inside the machine of the LifePak 15.
All right. Was there any change in the capnography for Omaree?
Yes.
What happened in this case?
His capnography was low. When we first started CPR, we were getting a couple of spikes, which to us may be an indication that there's possibly a return of circulation, meaning that the heart may have started beating again. At that point, we went ahead and checked for a pulse, which we didn't find a pulse. We were listening for heart tones, anything like that. We couldn't find that. So we just continued with the same CPR procedures that we were on.
You mentioned kind of the Bernalillo County protocols. As part of those protocols, do you consult with anybody?
Yes.
And who do you consult with?
MSEP.
What is that?
It's a medical control physician.
And did you consult with one in this case with Omaree?
I did not. The Albuquerque ambulance medic did.
Okay. At some point, did you decide to? Okay, so you were at the scene and you were doing the CPR.
Yes.
At some point, did you decide to try to take Omaree to the hospital?
Yes.
And who made that decision?
That was the medical control physician. We explained the situation, what we had done already, and the fact that we were getting spikes in capnography. So he felt that we should transport the patient due to the fact that we were getting spikes in capnography.
All right. And so when you make the decision to transport, which vehicle do you take him in?
In Albuquerque ambulance.
And what vehicle did you go in?
I went with them in Albuquerque ambulance.
Is that typical? I mean, since it's not your vehicle?
Yes.
And why is that?
Just the need for support, other medics, so that one medic isn't by themselves in the back of the unit.
Now, do you recall what time it was that you decided to transport?
No, I don't recall the exact time.
Or what time you arrived at the hospital?
No, I don't recall that.
Would looking at your report help refresh your memory?
I don't believe arrival at the hospital is documented in my report. That would be documented in Albuquerque ambulance's report.
Okay, so it would be better to ask
Yes, sir.
one of them? Okay. I asked before the number of doses of epinephrine that were administered. Would looking at your report help refresh your memory about the exact number of doses?
I believe it would give me the doses that we gave on scene, but I believe Albuquerque ambulance has their doses recorded on their report.
Okay. Do you recall the number that you were provided on scene?
Not offhand, no.
Okay. And so the document would help you refresh your
Yes.
memory about that, though?
Yes.
Okay.
There were 8 doses total.
And as a result of those 8 doses, did you notice, was there any change in Omaree's vital signs?
No, sir.
Any change as part of any of the resuscitative efforts that you were attempting?
The only change that we had was in capnography.
Okay. Did you see any signs of trauma on Omaree?
Once we initiated transport is when we noticed more. There was bite marks, some burn marks, some bruising.
Objection, Your Honor. Maybe approach.
Yeah.
All right, you were talking about some of the injuries. Have you, in your past experience, have you seen bite mark injuries before?
Yes.
And approximately how many times?
I couldn't give you the amount of times I've seen it.
Can you give like an estimation? Is it less than 20, more than 100?
At least 20. I'd say less than 100, but
Okay. And what kinds of bite marks have you seen? I mean, have they been human, animal?
both. I've seen animal bites, human bites. I've seen adult human bites, child human bites.
All right. What about burns? What's your experience about seeing patients that have been burned?
I've seen a lot of that from patients that self-inflict wounds on themselves. So.
And again, can you give an approximate number of times you've seen a patient that's been burned?
A dozen times at least.
In your experience, does a burn injury appear differently than a kind of like an abrasion type injury or a laceration type injury?
In my experience, it seems that the scarring's been a lot darker than an abrasion type.
All right. And you've also seen bruising type injuries, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you estimate how many bruising type injuries you've seen in your experience?
Thousands of times.
And the injuries that you saw in Omaree, you said appeared to be bite marks, burns, and some bruising?
I believe there's only one bite mark that we saw on his arm. The bruising was in multiple locations, burn marks were in multiple locations, and then there was a laceration to the left side around the brow area.
Mr. Spock, I'm having a very difficult time hearing, and I'm going to turn the microphone up too loud. We're sort of soft-spoken, so we do need to hear you. The jury needs to hear you. So could you speak up just a little bit?
Yes, sir.
All right. And where, you might have already said this, but where were you when you you noted these injuries?
The laceration, we were still on scene. The other injuries, we noticed those while we were in transport.
Right. Did you notify anyone of the injuries that you saw on the patient?
It was given to APD on arrival at the hospital of all the other additional injuries. We also notified the ER staff when we arrived on scene.
When you arrive at the emergency room, do you continue treating the patient?
We continue treating the patient until there's a transfer of care, meaning we get him off the Albuquerque ambulance gurney and put him onto the ER's bed. At that point, there's a transfer of care and they begin the patient treatment.
And so is that when they would take over any resuscitative efforts at that point?
Yes, sir.
On this patient, did you notice any signs of rigor mortis?
No, sir.
And what is rigor mortis?
It's when the body's muscle tissue begins to stiffen up.
Did you notice any signs of, and it sort of, you said that let me back up. The body starts to stiffen up in what circumstances though?
Based on downtime, when the amount of time that they've been pulseless and apneic.
So do you see rigor mortis in patients that are deceased?
Yes.
Okay. With this patient, did you see any signs of livor mortis?
No.
And what is livor mortis?
That's when the blood begins to pool because it hasn't been circulating for a certain amount of time.
And again, is that with deceased patients?
Yes, sir.
When you were treating this patient, did you make any note of the condition of Omaree's abdomen?
I don't believe I did, no.
You said you don't believe so. Looking at your report, would you note any sort of condition of the abdomen on the patient?
Yes.
Would looking at that report help refresh your memory?
If it was documented, yes.
Okay.
I have nothing documented.
All right, and so when you transfer care, what is your role then at that point, once you transfer care at the emergency room?
Albuquerque ambulance will usually do the transfer of care as far as the patient care report. If there's any additional information that they forgot that they may have left out, I'll just add that to it. But for the most part, Albuquerque ambulance will do that transfer of care.
All right, and then did you have any further contact with the patient or the family at that point after you transferred care in Omaree's case?
No, sir.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examine.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So your job when you respond to these sort of situations is to sort of assess very quickly what's going on, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's why you do those, check for the pulse, check the pupils, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in this case, when you checked Omaree's pupils, they were reactive.
I didn't do it, but another person on scene did, yes.
And reactivity means alive, correct? Brain
Um,
activity.
Some sort of reaction, yes.
Okay. And that's why you check the pupils. That's the point of it, right?
We checked for that and also to see if there was any opiate.
I'm sorry?
Any opiate use,
Okay.
which would cause pinpoint pupils, and they would be non-reactive.
And in this case, Omaree's pupils reacted to the light, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you did this capnography test, right?
It's not so much a test, it's a process during the code that will connect them to capnography.
Okay. And that also showed that there were some signs of life, correct?
It doesn't show that there's signs of life. That shows that there's a possibility that you may have a return of circulation, but it's not definite.
Right. Which is why there was that ultimate decision to transport Omaree to the hospital, correct?
The decision came from the medical director, yes.
And it was based on these things you were seeing when you were assessing Omaree's condition?
It was based off the spikes in capnography, yes.
Okay. Now, as far as downtime here for Omaree, you can't pinpoint exactly how long he was down, right?
No, no.
It could be 20 to 30 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. And you assess that, or you come up with that conclusion based on the fact that his torso was warm, right?
Yes.
And based on the warm torso, we know, you know, that he could not have been down long, right?
Yes, that's the reason why we began CPR.
Right. And that's how you get to that 20 to 30 minute time frame, right?
20 to 30 minute time frame.
Of downtime.
It's not exact as downtime.
Exactly. It's not exact.
No.
Had Omaree been that you would not have expected any sort of pupil reaction or any sort of reading on this capnography or the warm torso had he been down very long, correct?
I don't understand your question.
I'll ask it again. These three things you've been talking about during direct examination, that the fact that his pupils reacted, the fact that you had this reading on the capnography, and the fact that he had the warm torso, indicated that he hadn't been down long, correct?
The capnography didn't come into play on that decision. It was based off the body temperature, mainly, and the fact that, yeah, he did have some reaction in his pupils.
Okay.
That's what it was based
All
on.
right, so let's remove the capnography from it then. So
Mhm.
based on those other two, the pupils reacting and the warm torso, you concluded he had not been down long, right?
Correct.
Now, you talked about these injuries that you saw, and it sounds like you saw these alleged other injuries to Omaree when you were transporting him to the hospital, right?
Correct.
And you talked about this one injury and you said that it appeared to look like a bite injury, right?
Correct.
Right. You don't know if it actually is a bite injury, do you?
I'm very familiar with bite injuries, yes.
I'm asking you if you know if it was a bite injury.
No.
Okay. And you don't know when Omaree received that injury, whether it was a bite injury or some other injury, do you?
No.
And you don't know if that injury was inflicted by, say, his little sister?
No.
Or his little brother?
No.
Or someone at school?
No.
Or a cousin?
No.
You have no idea where that came from?
No.
And you just don't even know if it's a bite injury at all, do you?
I recognize bite injuries, yes I do.
And you don't know for certain if that is one?
I can't give you 100%, no.
And these injuries that you described as resembling a burn, you don't know if that could have been caused by, say, impetigo?
I have no idea what it would be caused by.
And impetigo makes small little circular marks on someone's body, doesn't it?
That I don't know.
Okay. And you don't know, assuming it was a burn, who inflicted it,
No.
if anyone.
No.
You don't know when it was sustained.
No.
And you don't know for certain if it even is a burn, do you?
I know what a burn injury looks like.
Okay. But do you know for certain?
No.
Thank you. And as far as the what you qualified or characterized as what appear to be bruises on Omaree, you don't know when Omaree sustained those bruises?
No.
Who inflicted them?
No.
Could have been his brother?
I don't know.
Could have been his sister?
I don't know where they
Could have
came
been a
from.
friend?
I don't know where they came from.
And you are not an expert in recognizing child abuse, are you?
An expert, no.
May I have a moment? Pass the witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
Can you read that?
Yeah, sure. On cross-examination, you were asked a question about the patient being down. What does down mean to you?
It's at the point where they became pulseless and apneic.
And just again, so we're clear, the pulseless and apnea means like their heart's not beating and they're not breathing.
Correct.
And in this case, do you know why the patient was pulseless and apneic?
No, I don't.
You were asked some questions about an injury that you called a bite injury. What did that injury look like to you? Like, how did it appear?
The shape of an open mouth.
And where was it on the patient?
The exact location, I don't recall. I think Albuquerque ambulance will have that documented better than what I did,
Okay.
based on the fact that we noticed it while we were in transport.
Okay. And you noted that the injury that you said was a burn injury. What did that injury look like to you?
Circular, dark.
And it appeared similar to other burn injuries you'd seen?
Yes.
Injection bleeding.
Stay. That's moving.
How did that injury appear to you?
It was circular and dark in scarring.
How did it appear in reference to other burn injuries you'd seen?
Pretty much the same. I've seen injuries from people that would drop cigarettes on themselves to see how long they could keep it on their arm as a bet, as stress relief. So I've seen those types of injuries many times.
And the injury to Omaree appeared similar to those?
Yes.
All right. No further questions, Your
I'll step down, Mr. Pat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got a subpoena, Mr. Marshall?
Honor. No, you don't. You don't need to keep Mr. Bach.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Rachel Winnicamp.
You saw this with the testimony about to get the court here this afternoon, the truth, independent, and truth.
Yes.
So I see. Scoot up to that microphone. Could you please state your full name for the record, spelling both your first and last?
Rachel Winnicamp, Rachael, last name Wennenkamp.
And good afternoon.
Morning, afternoon.
How are you employed?
Paramedic at Albuquerque Ambulance,
And how long have you been a paramedic for Albuquerque Ambulance?
almost 3.5 years.
And before that, how were you employed?
Albuquerque Ambulance.
And what did you do for them?
I was an EMT for
And-
about 6 years.
For about 6 years? And how, what's the difference between an EMT and a paramedic?
You start as a basic EMT, and it's just very broad, pretty much the lifeline of EMT. So you learn everything that you possibly need to know as a first responder, including medication pushes if need be. Then there's an intermediate that gives us intravenous access, starting the IVs, being able to give drugs through that, as well as other procedures that you could do. And then paramedic, it just broadens the medications. You can do intubations, you can do crikes, and you can also dart chests. It's just an advancement.
All right. So it's a higher level of certification?
Yes, sir.
And so in your capacity as a paramedic, what kind of calls do you respond to?
Everything that you could possibly think of. Traumas, medicals, even people that just need to talk, people that are having maybe behavioral issues, everything that you could possibly think of, we can respond to.
Okay. And were you working as a paramedic on December 27th, 2013?
Yes, sir.
And did you respond to a call involving Omaree Varela?
Yes, sir.
And how did the call come into you?
It came into an unknown life status questionable call.
And did you have any reason, like as a cause, that there was for the unknown, or like a cause of injury?
From what I can remember, a possible fall with a pediatric.
All right. And do you remember where the call was to?
The area of Comanche and San Mateo, but I couldn't tell you the exact address.
But it was here in Albuquerque, New Mexico?
Yes, sir.
What was Omaree's date of birth?
I'm sorry?
What was Omaree's date of birth?
I would have it on my report.
All right. So looking at that report would help refresh your memory?
Yes, sir. Thank you. 2/3 of 2004.
And do you recall what time the call came in?
Do you mind if I look at my report?
Any objection? No. Go ahead.
At 4:33 is when we received it.
How long did it take you to arrive on scene?
We arrived at 4:36.
All right. And who was there when you guys arrived on scene?
2 officers, 2 units, 2 police units, and a female, a gentleman, 2 other children, and Omaree.
Okay. And the 2 units, are you referring to police officers?
Yes. 2
with
police officer units.
With the Albuquerque Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. And was any other rescue on scene when you arrived?
No, we were the first rescue to arrive.
So what's your role when you arrive as a paramedic?
To first make contact with the patient that we're being called for and determine right then and there whether or not life status is questionable, and from that point we either do everything that we could possibly do for life-saving purposes, or if there's a more calm scene where we can actually sit there and question and talk with the patient, then we'll go from there. But it just depends on what we walk into.
And what about that day? What did you do as soon as you arrived on scene with Omaree?
We grabbed all of our equipment and the gurney, pushed the gurney up to the front door, grabbed our equipment, and started walking through the house that we were being pointed towards the back, and walked into an officer next to Omaree saying that there was no pulse. And so me and my partner walked up. We both checked for a pulse and determined he was pulseless and apneic, not breathing.
Okay. And who was your partner that day?
Eli Johnson.
And how did Omaree's skin feel?
I remember it being cool and moist.
Was that the same condition on the whole, for his entire body, or was there a differentiation between different body parts?
I couldn't tell you. I just felt his throat where I would feel for a pulse, and then when we picked him up and moved him to the ground, that's when I was feeling his skin. So I couldn't tell you. I went down his whole body and felt his whole body being moist or cool.
Okay. And where was he in the home? That you said you were directed to somewhere. Where was he in that home?
So when we first come in the house, we're directed across the living room to a kitchen area, through the kitchen and into a back bedroom. And he was laying on the bed, like on the edge of the bed, laying backwards.
And so what did you do at that point? You said you determined he was pulseless and apneic. What did you do?
We grabbed him and put him on the ground and initiated CPR.
And just so we're all clear, what is CPR?
It's pushing on his chest, trying to revive life.
And why do you do that?
I'm sorry?
Why do you push on the chest? What's the purpose behind that?
To compress his heart and try to do what the body's no longer doing. So we're trying to push blood through the system into the brain.
All right. And in your interaction with him, did you also administer any drugs?
Yes.
And what did you administer?
Epinephrine.
And why do you use epinephrine?
It's our first initial line of drug for anybody that is pulseless and apneic. We do it to try to give the body, the system, an extra boost to see if they could create its own electrical activity.
Do you recall how many doses were administered to Omaree?
I don't recall how many doses.
How often is the epinephrine administered?
Approximately every 3 to 5 minutes.
And who makes that determination?
Whoever is the lead or holding their watch, a time clock, to watch how long it's been since the last dose was pushed.
In this case, was that you?
Yes.
Okay. And what other signs are you checking for on the patient? Like what other procedures are you doing?
Throughout the code, whatever?
Yes.
So we're trying to provide them the compressions for their heart. We're also trying to provide an airway with a bag, mask that goes over their mouth to breathe. We're also getting IV access to give those drugs like epinephrine. Looking and trying to make sure the reasonings for what put the person in that situation to where their heart was no longer beating on their own.
And do you check for electronic or electrical activity of like the heart?
Yes, we also hook them up to the life pack, the pads on, just to make sure.
And did you note any electrical activity?
His initial heart rhythm was a flatline asystole.
And are you able to try to like shock the heart at that time?
Not for that rhythm.
And why is that?
There's no electrical activity to shock.
Okay. During this process, are you consulting with anyone?
I'm sorry?
During the process, when CPR is being administered and everything, are you consulting with anyone?
Just with everybody else that's on the team, so fire department and ambulance.
And while all this is going on, are you the one administering CPR, or what is your role in this situation?
Pretty much jotting down everything that is going on, the medications that's given, the time that it's given, IV starting, making sure everybody rotates through doing compressions so that nobody gets tired and we give good compressions, trying to do our job the best that we can. We kind of all hold each other up to those standards.
And what is capnography?
Capnography is a tool that we use to help us determine whether or not the tube that we put in their mouth has right placement. It reads your CO2 levels. So we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon monoxide. So that's what it's reading, what's coming out.
And were you measuring Omaree's capnography?
Yes, we were.
And did you note anything in particular about it?
Yes.
And what was that?
That initially his level of capnography to start off was kind of high, which was in the 20s, and that there was a spike that went up into the 40s.
And what does that indicate to you if there's a spike in capnography?
Typically, a spike in capnography determines ROSC, which is bringing the patient back to a point to where his heart was beating on his own and he was starting to be able to systematically function and breathe for himself. So take in the oxygen, breathe out the capnography more efficiently than us actually doing it with, a bag.
So what did those, in this case, what did those spikes mean to you regarding Omaree?
Well, it was enough to cause us all to call a doctor and have a discussion with him, because even though that was up, he stayed with a certain heart rhythm that showed no electrical activity. So we discussed it with that doctor and those findings, which we thought was odd. And at that point determined that's when we were going to transport.
At some point, do you discuss with any of the adults there what happened, why the patient's in this condition?
Any of the adults on scene?
Yes.
Yes, I was going into the kitchen to talk to Cynthia, and there was another officer there trying to find out how he ended up in this position, whether or not it was a traumatic event or what could have happened, so that we can go from that point.
What was indicated to you about what had occurred?
From what I can remember without having my chart in my hand, that he was playing on the bed with one of his little younger siblings, and they were fighting, got pushed off, and fell back, hit his head on the tile.
And that was, you said, off the bed?
Off the bed, yes.
Did they give you any sort of indication how long it was before the 911 was called?
Objection, you're saying.
And Your Honor, I think it is an exception under 11803D.
Yeah, come forward.
Is it important for you to know how long a patient's down before you arrive?
Yes.
Why is that important?
The body just naturally starts to go through things that'll start making us become maybe more stiff, or our organs less functionable, to try and bring back to life. And so usually downtime is what we call it, is a big issue.
And how does that factor into treatment of a patient, the downtime?
It's not so much for us unless there's obvious death, but more for the doctors if we transport the patient or if we talk to them on the phone.
So it could be useful to you in treatment and diagnosis.
Let me hear the question first.
It could be useful to you for treatment and diagnosis, but you're asking the question for use by the physicians?
Well,
Sorry. Go ahead. Answer
Sorry.
the question. Sorry.
so it's still helpful for us as well. It doesn't really change a whole lot of what we do. We're still doing everything we can possibly do. But it's still helpful for the physicians because it lets them know the possible downtime and what they could be dealing with.
Okay. And so in this case with Omaree, was it important for you to know how long he was down before you arrived?
Yes, it's always important for us.
And did you get any indication of how long that was?
Just from what was told to us,
And what was that?
possibly up to 30 minutes.
And who was providing that information to you?
Cynthia.
What was her demeanor or affect as she was providing you this information?
I would probably describe it as a flat affect.
Was there any sort of other medical information that was provided to you that you thought was odd or different?
Yes. As we were preparing Omaree to be transported to the hospital, it was also said that he possibly could have had suicidal ideations, that he had been talking to her or something prior, a few days prior to it, that might have gotten into some medications at the house.
And did you see any sort of signs that Omaree had gotten into any medications, whether pill bottles or anything?
I didn't see any pill bottles hanging around that I could visually see.
But based on that information, did you provide or give the patient any sort of medication?
Yes.
And what was that?
Narcan.
And what is Narcan?
Narcan is a medication that will attempt to bump off narcotics like heroin or any of those kinds of meds, bump them off the receptor site and attach to it for a minimum amount of time, and it'll allow the patient to either wake up or come back.
Did the application of the Narcan, did it have any effect on Omaree?
No.
So while you're going through your resuscitative efforts, are you seeing any responses other than the capnography you'd mentioned?
No.
What was your decision to do with the patient at that point?
After talking to the doctor, or?
Sure. So you, at some point, do you consult with a doctor?
Yes.
And why do you do that?
We do that multiple different reasons. We could do it to either discontinue a code that we're running, or just to talk with them, see if they have any ideas of what to do, or even like in this situation with the capnography being questioned.
And so, in this case, do you recall who you consulted with? Which doctor?
Dr. Brody.
And as part of that consultation, what did you decide?
We decided to transport him to the emergency room.
And what factored into that decision?
The capnography mainly. Not having a whole lot of evidence behind capnography and the LMA, which was the tube we put down his throat, and pediatrics.
And what do you mean by pediatrics?
Children.
Are you referring to the patient's age as a factor, or capnography and pediatrics? I wasn't sure what you were.
Not a whole lot of studies. So, most of everything in medicine is based on studies and the findings of that. And he was saying to me over the phone that there's not a whole lot of information to say that that would be a main reason to, but because of it, we're going to transport.
Okay. Do other things go into that decision? I mean, does a patient's age, or does the causation of the injury, does any of that factor into a decision to transport?
Yes.
And how did it factor in this case?
Mainly the capnography, the fact that he was a child as well, and we were doing everything that we could do on scene, and I think no doc will really leave a child on scene.
Okay. What vehicle was he transported in?
Albuquerque ambulance.
And that was your vehicle?
Yes, sir.
And during the transportation, what are you doing?
I'm in the back with the patient.
Was anyone else back there with you?
Yes.
Who was that?
2 other firefighters, I believe.
Okay, so, and you may have mentioned this earlier, but were you working in kind of a coordinated effort?
Yes.
Okay. While you were, or at any point, do you see any signs of trauma on the patient?
In the back of the ambulance?
At any point,
Any point?
while you're treating Omaree?
Mostly in the back of the ambulance. Initially on scene, the only thing that I can remember seeing was the hematoma laceration above his eye, but it kind of moved really quick, and by the time we put pads on his chest, it was dark in that room, so I couldn't say anything from that point. When we got him into the back of the ambulance where we had lots of light, that's when I saw a little bit more of the bruising and a bite mark on the wrist.
All right. And you said before you're making a lot of different notes. Do you record where some of the injuries are on your chart?
Yes.
And do you recall where you mentioned that you saw some bruising. Do you recall where the bruising was at?
The bruising, I saw a hematoma to his left eyebrow area. I remember seeing bruises on his arms. And I can't remember anywhere else. Not without seeing my chart.
Would looking at your chart help refresh your memory?
Yes.
Any objection?
No.
Do you want me to read it to you?
Oh, if you could just read it to yourself, and
okay.
hopefully that'll refresh your memory about what you noted that day.
Okay.
All right. And where was the bruising?
On his arms and on his face, on his eyebrow.
Did you make a note of like how his stomach or abdomen felt?
Yes, when we were performing CPR,
And what did you note?
that his stomach was distended.
And what does that mean?
It means getting swollen to a point to where it's obvious.
How does it feel? Like when a stomach's distended, is it like squishy, or is it hard, or what is it? How does it feel?
It's taut. It's taut, like a swollen balloon.
Okay.
It's taut. If you tap on it, you could almost hear a repercussion.
Is that normal?
No.
Is that indicative of anything to you?
Sometimes it can be.
Objection, speculation. She's about to speculate.
Talking about in general, or we're talking about specifically this case?
Just in general, in the witness's experience?
I'll never testify generally.
So generally, why might a stomach be distended?
It could be from us doing breaths by breathing for him. It could be if somebody is already distended to that point, it could be some kind of injury. It could be, an injury that we could have been pushing on his chest from. Could be for just about anything.
Okay. Do you recall when you left the house?
What time it was?
What time?
I don't.
Do you recall how long it took to get to the hospital?
I don't.
Would looking at your report, would that help refresh your memory?
Yes.
sorry. And do you recall when you left the house?
Yes,
What time was that?
at 5:06.
And how long or what time did you arrive at the hospital?
At 4:30. Oh, at hospital?
Yes, sorry.
5:15.
And you may have already said it, but what time did you arrive on scene?
4:36.
Okay. While you're in transit, what are you doing with the patient?
Continuing CPR throughout the transport, continuing to give him medications every 3 to 5 minutes, breathing for him.
While you were in transit, did you see any changes?
No.
And what happens when you get to the hospital?
We take him out of the back of the ambulance and roll him into UNM recess room.
And I don't think I asked this question. Which hospital are we talking about? I think you just told me, but.
University of New Mexico.
Okay. And what's the recess room?
It's a portion of the hospital where doctors are paged to immediately come and assess the patient and continue care directly from us as immediate as possible.
All right. And do you continue to care for the patient once you arrive at the hospital?
Once we arrive to the hospital and the patient has been moved over from our gurney to the bed, to the hospital bed, that's at that point, all the doctors are already hands-on with the patient.
All right. So at that point, do you have any further role in the care of the patient?
Just by turning over everything that we know about what led to this event and the status of the patient right now.
Did you have any further contact at all with Omaree or anyone else from that household after that?
No.
You have a moment here?
Yes.
Pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir.
All right, so begin a little bit with your qualifications now. You've explained the difference between an EMT and a paramedic, right?
Yes, sir.
And it sounds like your career's progressed from you were an EMT for a while, now you're a paramedic, and you continue to work in that capacity, right?
Yes, sir.
And back when this happened in 2013, you were a fairly new paramedic, were you not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it sounds like your career's been going well and all, but were you the person in charge of the scene, or was it someone else? As far as commanding officer of the paramedics?
Well, it's usually the first paramedic on scene, but the person that goes back is the most senior medic.
Okay. All right. And as a paramedic, your primary job is to do an immediate diagnosis of what the problem is, why the person is in whatever condition, and then get them stabilized and into the hospital if necessary for more treatment, right?
Correct. We don't diagnose, but
You're,
correct.
well, I've used the wrong. If they're having a heart attack, you want to determine whether it's a cardiac issue, or a pulmonary issue, or if they're bleeding to death, or if they have a hole in their head. You're going to make some initial diagnoses, right?
Correct.
And not diagnose in the sense of, well, this person has cancer or this person has leukemia, but you're figuring out how to stabilize this person to most enhance their ability to continue living, right?
Correct.
All right. And you arrived at this scene, and as you've explained, you go into the house, and there's a young child laying on the bed, right?
Correct.
And you've described him as being not breathing, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, this term down, and I've heard it described as down and out. How would you best tell me what term should I use? Down, down and out? What lingo do you use in your profession?
As far as to determine that he's unconscious?
Well, there's a difference between being down.
Right.
And there's a difference between just being unconscious, right?
It's a pretty generalized term, down and out.
Okay, well, I'd like to explore this general term because I think the jury needs to know the difference between someone who's unconscious but breathing, which would be certainly one class or one category, and then somebody who is not breathing with no heartbeat or not breathing with a light, faint heartbeat. These are all different things, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, let's suppose for a minute that if you arrive on a scene and someone is unconscious but they're breathing, that certainly isn't as serious as someone who's not responding, right? I mean, if they have respiratory function, they have heart function, right?
Well, I guess you can think of it as being subjective versus objective.
Okay.
When I describe somebody that is from a distance and they're on the ground, I would say that they're down and out, or they're down.
Okay.
By me coming up to them and being able to assess them and see that they're breathing or feel that they're breathing or their pulse, then that's when I would determine that they're apneic and pulseless.
Okay, and when you arrived at this scene and you first began to examine Omaree, he was apneic and pulseless, right?
Correct.
But we talked about there were other signs. His pupils were still reactive, right?
I never saw his pupils reactive.
You didn't.
No.
There was CO2 exchange to some degree.
Correct.
And that's indicative of at least some sign of life, right?
Usually.
Usually, it's indicative of some respiratory function, right?
Correct.
Okay. Some exchange in the lungs between the CO2, which is being taken out of our body, and the oxygen that's going in, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you have no way of determining how long Omaree had been apneic and pulseless, right?
No.
Okay. And you're not being called upon to either speculate or offer any evidence about that, right? I mean, you weren't asking direct, and you don't have an opinion, right? About how long he was pulseless and apneic.
Have I been asked that?
Yeah.
No, not directly.
Okay. But you have offered, at least in the past, and I'm going to ask you today, you've been offered, you've offered an opinion or offered some evidence about how long he was down, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that's not necessarily pulseless and apneic, but that's down, as in maybe unresponsive, right?
Correct.
And there's a big difference between being pulseless and apneic and being unresponsive, right?
Correct.
And so when you talked a moment ago about this 30 minutes, that was reported to you that the child had been unresponsive for about 30 minutes, right?
We never switched around unresponsive, just how long he'd been down.
Okay, but you see my point here, right? That there is a big difference between how long someone is unconscious but breathing with a heartbeat and how long they are not breathing and with no heartbeat, right?
Yes, sir.
And that is a pretty significant distinction in your line of work, right?
Yes, sir.
And so what you have today to offer this jury is that by evidence you learned at the scene that Omaree had been unconscious for about 30 minutes, right?
Correct.
Okay. But no evidence, and nor are you prepared to offer any evidence about how long he'd been apneic and pulseless, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, there are some things that you look for that can determine how long someone has been pulseless and apneic, right?
Correct.
And those would include, say, for instance, core body temperature, right?
Possibly.
Yeah, because if someone is pulseless, blood's not flowing from the heart to your extremities, correct?
Correct.
And so the longer blood is not flowing from your heart to your extremities, the cooler those extremities are going to be, right?
Correct.
And if someone is pulseless and apneic for an extended period of time, more than just a few minutes, that core temperature begins to drop, right?
Correct.
And so without speculating, if the extremities are cool but the core body temperature is still warm, that would at least offer you evidence the child or the individual, whether it's a child in this case or anybody else, has not been pulseless and apneic for a very significant period of time, correct?
Yes, typically, yes.
Typically, and there's nothing to suggest that this was an atypical situation, right? I mean, Omaree didn't appear to have any other medical conditions that would cause his body to cool faster than the normal human body, right?
Right.
And so what you can best tell this jury, that if the child's body temperature, if the core temperature was still warm, in your experience, he had not been pulseless and apneic for a very long period of time, correct?
I mean, I couldn't say at a specific amount, but
I'm
yes,
not
we
asking for-
typically start CPR on people that, even though their extremities might be blue or cyanotic, but that their core is warm, yes.
Yes, and that's indicative. And if CPR had been administered prior to your arrival, that would certainly make a difference as to whether or not the core body temperature had fallen to a large degree. Correct? If someone is performing CPR, that helps preserve the possibility of life. Correct?
It helps increase his possibility to come back to life.
That increases the chance of ultimate survival.
Yeah.
Right. And likewise, if someone applies oxygen, an oxygen mask, or a source of oxygen, that would also increase the chance that that individual, in this case Omaree, had a chance of survival. Right.
It increases it, yes.
And I'm not asking you to reach any ultimate determination, but I'm just asking, based on your experience as a paramedic EMT, if these are things that would help increase the chance of survival.
Yes.
Right? And both CPR, chest compressions, as well as oxygen, both would do that, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the and I think you described a moment ago that your first line, it's not line of defense because that's the wrong word, but CPR is the CPR. It's been a long time since I was in Boy Scouts. What's its name? Circulatory, pulmonary, compression, resuscitation. Right?
Correct.
Okay. CPR is the very first line, the very first thing that you're going to do as a life-saving paramedic EMT to try to increase someone's chance of survival, right?
Correct.
And that's standard in your profession. Before you put in the IV, before you do a breathing bag, anything else, you start CPR, right?
Correct.
And when you got there, that's exactly what you did, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, Omaree was hooked up, or at least some point in time, hooked up is probably not the right word, but electrocardiogram was placed on his body, and you described his heart rate as flat line, right?
Correct.
Okay. But despite his heartbeat or heart rate being flat line, there was still this spiking of the CO2 output, correct?
Correct.
And there was still appeared to be some brain activity because well, you didn't look at his eyes, right? You never looked at the child's
Not me
eyes.
directly, no.
Okay, but you did experience or have direct knowledge of the CO2 output spiking, correct?
Correct.
And that was one of the things you relayed to the doctor who you were consulting with, and that was one of the reasons that the doctor informed you that we needed to do a transport, right?
Correct.
Now, when you said that there's not very many doctors who would leave a child at the scene, I get that.
Yeah.
But if you'd have reported that, look, this child is no CO2, no heartbeat, he's cold, that might have changed, of course, the doctor's determination to bring him to the hospital, right?
I've never had that happen.
Okay, but you took the child to the hospital because somebody felt, at least, perhaps you, perhaps the other EMT, perhaps the doctor, that you could still save him, right?
Correct.
Okay.
All of us believe that.
Oh, and that's what you want to believe in your job, right? I mean, your job is to save lives.
Correct.
Okay. Now, this downtime, this 30 minutes of downtime, which we haven't been able to distinguish, or you're not able to distinguish between apneic and pulseless versus just unconscious, that was relayed to you by someone else at the scene, right?
Correct.
Okay. Did you understand that to be a certain amount of time or a guesstimation?
I would only assume a guesstimation.
A guesstimation.
Yeah.
So nobody said, man, I looked at my watch at such and such time, and this is when he went down, and then we did whatever. Nobody said that.
Correct.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the bruising and the lacerations that you observed on the body.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that I think you'll agree with me on is that that bruising and trying to establish when a bruise happened is not something that you're able to do, right?
No.
In fact, I think you'll agree with me that it's impossible to date a bruise, right?
Yeah, I'm not personally trained for it.
Nor are any doctors.
Oh, there you go.
And so,
Defense counsel is testifying.
I will withdraw the question. So when you indicated that you saw bruising on the child's arm, for instance, you're not telling this jury, are you, that you had some belief or some evidence to offer that the bruising happened on this day?
I couldn't say yes or no.
Okay. And you're not being asked to testify that because that's so far outside your field of expertise, correct?
Correct.
You just noted that the child had some bruises on his arms, right? And let's see, a hematoma on his left eye. Now, hematoma is what, for us who aren't EMTs and doctors or ER nurses, what's a hematoma?
A swollen area of your body or your skin.
Okay. It's if I get, if I have some sort of injury, right, that causes my skin to maybe swell and get red.
Correct.
So a hematoma is not necessarily, a hematoma is different than a laceration, right?
Correct.
A laceration would be an opening in the skin, right?
Correct.
And the science or this idea that one can date pinpoint the time that a laceration occurs is the same as the bruising, right? It's very difficult.
Correct.
It's hard.
For me, yes.
Right. Unless there is an open bleeding wound that looks immediate, then you can make a determination whether something is a fresh wound, right? Like if someone's laying on the ground bleeding and you're the EMT that responds, you can think, well, that probably just happened.
Right.
But other than that, it becomes an inexact science, right? At least for you.
Correct.
Okay. Now, the bite mark on the wrist. All right. You've probably seen your fair share of bite marks, both animal and human, in your time as a paramedic EMT, right?
Yes, sir.
And probably heard every story in the book on how somebody or what bites somebody to result in a bite mark on a child's, on anybody's body, right?
Correct.
And you're certainly aware in this situation that there was an infant in the home, right?
Correct.
And another very young child, a 5-year-old, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, was the bite mark photographed?
Maybe, I'm not sure. I didn't stay.
Okay. Did it appear to be a fresh bite mark, or did it look like other lacerations? Hard to tell.
I couldn't recall.
Couldn't recall. So you're not offering testimony that you observed a fresh bite mark on this little boy's arm?
No,
Just-
I'm just noticing just what I noticed on the
Something
on the child.
appeared to be a bite mark on the
Correct.
child's arm. Okay. Now, the distended abdomen. You indicated there's a variety of causes of distended abdomen, correct?
Yes, sir.
Including including perhaps the treatment that he was receiving, compressions.
Correct. Sometimes when we're doing compressions, we put an airway in, or even just the mask with the bag. We can cause some kind of distension to start happening in his stomach.
Okay. And did the distension of the stomach, in the stomach area of the stomach, was that noticeable before you started doing work on the child, or after?
During the process.
Okay. So the abdomen became swollen as you were performing these acts that you know from your job can cause a distended abdomen, correct?
Correct. They give us a tool to actually make it go,
Okay.
the distension to go away.
Okay. Not only is it not uncommon for this to happen, it's a fairly common occurrence, isn't it?
That they give us a tool to hopefully
No.
help
They
it.
probably give you a tool every time.
Yeah.
But it's not an uncommon occurrence to have this distension of the abdomen during these life-saving protocols.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Pass the witness.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. cross-examination, you mentioned that the distension in the abdomen, it's possible it came from either the bag or the compressions.
Either one, I couldn't tell you what it came from.
But I think previously on your direct examination, did you testify that there are other causes that could cause a person's abdomen to be distended?
Yeah.
And what are
there's-
those?
Could have been injuries, just prior injuries. It could,
What kinds of injuries? Because injuries is kind of,
traumatic, there could be a traumatic injury to the area. There's situations where we've been on calls where a person's stomach has become distended that's still breathing on their own. So that could have been some kind of injury from that.
and you had mentioned that somebody indicated how long Omaree was down.
Okay.
Was that time frame that was given to you, was that consistent or inconsistent with the way Omaree was presenting?
It seemed pretty consistent. He was cool to the touch, so.
You were also asked some questions about CPR, and just so we're clear, in which situations do you actually apply CPR?
Somebody who's has no heartbeat and not breathing on their own.
So if somebody had a heartbeat and was breathing on their own, would you administer CPR?
We would typically start breathing for them first.
So is it appropriate if somebody is not, if somebody is actually breathing and has a heart rate, is it appropriate to do CPR?
No.
Okay. There was one question, and I think it was that this wasn't an atypical situation, but is it normal for a 9-year-old to be pulseless and apneic?
No.
You were also asked some questions about why you do CPR and the way it's done. And maybe you should, normally when you're administering CPR, how many breaths are you trying to administer a minute?
Well, the protocol has changed recently, but typically about 10 to 12 with the bag. If we have an airway in place, it's continuous. So we'd breathe about every 5 seconds.
And about how many chest compressions per minute are you trying to do?
100 a minute.
If someone administered, if a person was pulseless and apneic, and someone administered only either 3 or 4 breaths or 3 or 4 compressions, would that help the patient much?
Still giving the breaths would help, but it would decrease the likelihood of him being able to exchange the oxygen and supply the rest of his organs, the rest of his body with the oxygen.
And so so if a person was down for a period of time, that 3 or 4 breaths, it would decrease the likelihood of the survival of the patient.
Correct.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Are we releasing this witness from the subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want your chair back?
Yes. We're going to take her afternoon break. I think that's enough. Give you a chance to sort of relax a little bit. You've heard some evidence. It's not time to start your deliberation, folks. So keep hearing that from me. Just go on and relax. I think there are some soft drinks and some other things in the room. We'll come get you in about 15 minutes or so. Okay? Please rise for the jury. Please be seated. All right, let's take a 15 or 20-minute break. So please be back here by at least 20 after, and we'll start seeing where we are. How many witnesses do you have left?
We have at least two. We have a possibility for a third witness where we're trying to find out if he's going to be available or not, because there was an objection to this individual being in uniform, and so we're seeing if he's going to be able to change in time and be back. But we have at least two more.
All right, let's take a break. Thanks. We'll be at recess.
All rise.